So to give you a little bit of context about ERA and why we've started this, ERA is the Ecological Restoration Alliance. And the idea of the Ecological Restoration Alliance is that we get together and we get together to understand the restoration practice and how is it that we can take up restoration in India. And some of the ways that we try and do this is by having such webinars to get people together and learn from experts or learn from people on how they have dealt with some of these issues. Um, and another part of it then is also how do we build a community around restoration? And for that, once people sign up or become members, then there is a whole, world of exploration that happens in terms of understanding ideas, methods, different geographies, and how we all come together for that. And given that, I think I want to hand it over to Suprabha first to just give a quick overview of this topic in itself and in the context in which that we've thought to come up with this discussion. So, Supri?
Hello. Hi, everyone. Hoping that this connection lasts. I'm really happy to welcome everyone to this webinar that we have been planning and excited about for a while. I would just like to first thank the steering committee of the ERA for being so open and gracious and, I think fostering a climate of discourse and inquiry and also with affection. So we're dealing with large and complex issues and how we think and what we do and the consequences of not just our individual places, but some of the things that we may be initiating, which has a larger impact on land and peoples. I think this is a very serious group and is welcoming input of different kinds and also discourse. And I think the topic of invasives, or as I've been calling them first responders to destruction, that it requires a lot of thinking together because the methodology can have such large impact. It's not to question or judge any particular instance of how you regard a particular plant or animal or, but it is this larger consequence. And especially if we start getting into, very large scale issues. So this has been raised again and again in our meetings. And how we regard these fellow members of the biosphere and where does the boundary begin as to who is meant to be in a particular place or regarded as welcome or utilized in our particular strategies, and perhaps some of us do. So this is really to begin that whole process of thinking together and consolidating some of our more extreme or divergent opinions into just a shared framework. So we know that we all, that different people are thinking differently about these things. And out of which at least a dialogue can begin, and at least a common appraisal of a very large problem that we all perceive, which is of the destruction of habitat and, the loss of species and so on. So I'm going to just stop it there, and I want to thank the ERA Alliance as a whole and all the people who are listening in today. I would like to, first of all, also, before I end, to thank the people I live and work with who are members of this landscape for intergenerational, time periods, and a bunch of Adivasi people, settler people, students, visitors who have raised all sorts of questions and, have actually also tried to deal with, the current crisis in different ways. So I'd really just like to thank everyone, and let's go for a really fun and interesting multi-perspective discussion. So over to you, Megha.
Okay, just let me know, Suprabha, if you can see my screen. Uh,
Yeah, I can see it.
you can?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. So today I will talk about trait-based approach to understand invasive plant species. Um, so since this is first talk in a series of hopefully many discussions that ERA will host about invasive species, I will like to introduce invasive species. So an alien species is a
Sorry,
species.
uh, sorry to interrupt you, but could we please request that can you please introduce yourself and your work as well a little bit? Uh, is
Okay,
that
yeah,
okay?
yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
sorry.
yes. Yeah. So my name is Megha Ojha, and I am a final year PhD student in ISER Pune Department of Biology. My PhD work is on invasive plant species, but I have been working on invasive species since 2017, so a long time. I've looked at different aspects of invasion with the uh, plant soil interactions and impact assessments of invasion on savannas, trade based approaches. But my major focus of my PhD work has been understanding invasion and invasive species in terms of impact on tropical savannas around the northern Western Ghats. So, an alien species is a species which is introduced outside its natural past or present distribution. But if this alien species becomes problematic in an area where it is introduced, it's termed as invasive alien species. The negative impact is at multiple levels of biodiversity. So we know that invasive species can cause reduction in population sizes, sometimes species extinctions, both of which can lead to alteration in community composition, which can further translate at higher level ecosystem processes like changing ecosystem functions and therefore the services that we get from these ecosystems. They have contributed to 60% of the global species extinctions, either directly or with some other factor. And the impacts are not just restricted to the impact on biodiversity, but they have negative economic impact as well. India, in fact, has the third highest economic loss related to invasive species in the world. A little bit of history of invasion. So Charles Elton is the father of invasion biology. His seminal work came in 1958, where first time he talked about invasive plants and animal species. And in his book, he talks about invasive species and says that the outbreaks in population that occur because of a foreign species' successful invasion in another country. What is very important to understand it, what do invasion biologists mean by foreign? Because these terms are very important when we are defining what is native, what is foreign, how do we know something is non-native or not. So to do that, invasion biologists realized to avoid the confusion, 1500 AD is considered as a landmark for anything to be considered as non-native or alien. Okay, so anything that has been present in an area since before 1500 AD is going to be considered as native to that region. However, after 1500 AD, which is also when a lot European exploration and human mediated species transfers began, is considered as a time point after which, if the introduction of a species has been in a region, it is going to be considered as a non-native introduction. Species can naturally migrate to a region as well. So any species, if it has naturally migrated after 1500 AD to a new area, it is still going to be considered as a natural migrant and therefore native to that area. So this after this 1500 landmark, what do we see is that there has been a tremendous increase in number of alien species across the globe, and this increase has especially been rapid from 1900 onwards, when there was industrialization and globalization and being moving everywhere on the earth, and it is predicted to increase in the future. However, everything which is alien is not invasive, and it is very important to understand. So, if you look at this figure here, it is a normal community assembly figure. It's like it has got nothing to do with invasion. So, for any species to come and establish in a new area, it has to cross certain barriers. It has to first be able to come to that area, so it has to overcome the dispersal filter. Only if it is able to reach in an area will it be able to be in that area. So what happens with invasive species is humans actually help a lot of species to overcome this barrier, which otherwise they would not have been able to cross. Okay, so once a species comes to an area, even then it won't be able to survive in that area unless it is able to overcome the environmental conditions that are present in that area. So if a species is able to tolerate precipitation or temperature regime of that area, only then it will be able to establish. And once it establishes, it also has to overcome a lot of biotic interactions that happen, which is the interaction filter. So competition with co-occurring species, native species, or herbivory, or all other sorts of interactions that are going to be involved. And only then will a species be able to establish in an area. Now, everything that crosses a dispersal filter because of human mediated introductions are going to be caused as alien, right? But everything that is alien is not invasive. So everything that gets introduced in an area does not necessarily will become invasive, because not everything that is introduced will be able to reproduce on its own. So all those species will be known as casual aliens. And a few of them will be able to reproduce on their own after introduction and maintain a self-sustaining population. So then they are going to be called as naturalized species. And only a subset of naturalized species will then be able to, increase their range in the introduced area and then cause negative impact on the natural habitats or the disturbed habitats of the introduced area. And those are what are known as invasive species. So now the question is, what makes a species invasive? So there are thousands of studies across the globe that talk about, species specific examples across plant kingdoms, animal kingdom, animals everywhere, right? But are there things that we can look at? Can we move beyond context dependency? Can we identify certain traits that makes a species invasive? And that's what I have worked on. So traits, what are traits? Organisms possess a syndrome of traits which help them grow, survive, and reproduce in an environment. And this has got nothing to do with invasion. So height, for example, is a trait which will help you to capture sunlight and grow, reproduce, and survive in an environment. But with weedy species, way back in 1965, people had identified that the species which are weedy in nature or invasive have certain traits associated with them. And it's eventually over the period of time, when there were a lot of studies across different species, different regions that started to come up, where people started to identify a broader ecological patterns. And then people identified that there were certain traits, they identified that there are 38 traits that often people across the globe, across the plants, are studying and associating with those plants which are invasive in nature. However, not all the traits, it's just looking at traits in themselves is not important, because just imagine a tree which is 10 meters in height in a forest which has other trees which are of the same height. The trait itself will not be as important, whereas the same tree in a savanna where the average height of woody vegetation is lower, a 10-meter height would make a great difference. So people have found that in invasion biology, it's the trait difference that is more important than the absolute trait values. And meta-analysis studies that have looked at multiple studies which have compared invasive species with co-occurring native species have found that it's actually the difference that matters, and invasive species usually have higher trait value related to performance related traits. So traits which are associated with competition like height or resource acquisition. So for these traits, invasive species will have higher trait value than the native species. But if you compare the invasive species with the native species, which are actually invasive in some other part of the world, then you do not find this difference in the traits. So it has to do something with the traits. It is very critical to understand that the traits are playing a role in invasion success of a species. So to test that, I also wanted to understand if traits play a role in success of invasive plants in northern Western Ghats, which is the study area that I worked in for my PhD. So for the methods, I looked at 79 major invasive plant species of this region, and we looked at 5 traits which were related to competition, resource acquisition, and reproduction of a species. I then tried to understand the relationship between invasion success, which was estimated through spatial extent, how widespread the species is in the region with various traits, and then compared the trait space overlap between a subset of invasive with the native species. So what I found here is in this slide, if you see, just it's a little complicated graph, but all you need to do is look at the traits. So all these panels over here are the arrows over here are the traits that I'm looking at. So LA would be leaf area, H max is the height, and in the direction in which the arrow is moving is the direction in which the trait value is increasing. The points here are all the species that we studied, the 79 invasive species. What we see is that the species are using different trait combinations to exist. So you have species in this first quadrant as well as second quadrant and third and fourth. However, what we found is that if you try to understand if one of these axes, which is PC2 here, which has higher loading of resource acquisitive traits like LMA, which is leaf mass per unit area, and LDMC, if a species had higher value of these traits, they ended up becoming more spatially widespread and more successful. And I also wanted to understand if these differences lie in when I compared the native species with the invasive species, because now we know that it is absolute trait difference doesn't matter. It's the difference from the native community that is important. And what we find is that the blue here are all the native species and the red are invasive. And what we find is that, yes, in terms of competitive access, which is leaf area and height, invasive species differs from the co-occurring native species. So one takeaway from this work, I would say, my talk, if you want, is that trait-based understanding of invasive species is a promising field of research and needs to be explored in multiple habitat types with different types of invaders. With this, I would like to acknowledge all my collaborators, my supervisor, Dr. Deepak Barua, and everybody else who helped me do this work. Thank you, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Megha, for the presentation. I'm sorry, my connection.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah. I think if we have any questions, we can take that up right now. Let me just look if I think Sneha has raised her hand. Sneha, do you want to take the do you want to ask Megha directly?
Yeah, sure. Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Megha. It was a really good presentation and really nice to see trait-based approach being used in understanding invasive. Did you incorporate phylogeny in your trait-based analysis?
No, I have not done that. However, the traits that I have used are related to competition, so leaf area and height. A reproductive trait I looked at was seed volume, and resource acquisitive trait that I looked at was LDMC and LMA.
And sorry, I'm not from plant background. What is LDMC and LMA?
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. LDMC is leaf dry matter content and LMA is leaf mass per unit area. So what that means is how much carbon dry mass content a species have. So per unit area. So if you have higher LMA, it means you have a slower strategy. Whereas if you have a lower LMA, you have a higher resource use strategy. So it talks about resource acquisition of a species. So in general, if I have to talk in terms of life forms, a herbaceous annual species will have a lower LMA, whereas a perennial evergreen tree will have a higher LMA.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Neha, for that question. And I think next we have Jyotin, who's also raised their hand. Do you want to take that?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Megha, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, this is Kuti from Tata Motors. Very interesting and inspiring research. If I were to ask you, see, we are all practitioners of a body of research or body of work that you have done. What is your, simple recommendation for us as practitioners, where we have got, let's say, about all over the country, we have got for 4,000 acres. I think there's some disturbance. Yes, 1 second. I think there is some disturbance because there are some unmuted mics.
Okay. I got your question. I would think that this question actually needs to be discussed during the panel discussion framework, because a lot of talks after my talk you will get a more clear understanding for practitioners, and we can actually revisit this question during the panel discussion.
All right, I'll wait. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jyotin, and thanks, Megha. And I think I just want to impress upon time, and maybe what we'll do is we'll take the rest of the questions in the panel discussion. So Harinder, Krishna, it's noted that we have these questions, and we'll take it up shortly. Thank you so much. I think it's also now I would like to introduce the next speaker. And the next speaker that we have is Dr. Geetha Ramaswamy. Dr. Geetha Ramaswamy is an ecologist, nature educator, and scientist who currently works on understanding the impacts of the invasive plant Lantana camara on native plant dispersers interactions. She's also the program manager at Season Watch. Her PhD and postdoctoral research also focused on Lantana. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Geetha Ramaswamy to take this to have the next round of presentation. Thank you so much. Geetha, over to you.
Hi. So thanks so much for that introduction, Arjun, and thanks also for the opportunity to be part of this panel. I am going to, I hope I'm still audible.
Yeah, you are.
Yes, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Megha gave a very nice introduction about what makes an invasive an invasive. I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on what impacts invasive species have had on ecosystems and how things become complicated because of that. And I'll be focusing more on invasive alien plants. That's because a large amount of literature comes from plants because they are there and they don't run away. And we know the body of this understanding has been built mostly based on the research that's been done on plants. So people who know the plants on this slide must be feeling a lot of strong emotions at this point of time.
We don't see your slide, sorry.
Can you?
Not yet.
You can't see any slide?
No, we just see you.
Your video.
Oh, okay. I thought you didn't see my slides. But can you see my slide now?
Yes, we can see your slide now, and maybe you can put it on present mode, and we're good to go.
I'm very sorry. Right. Okay, this slide is what I was talking about. Many people who know these plants may feel a lot of strong emotions towards these plants. Most of these plants have had the dubious distinction of being 100 most invasive, 10 most notorious, and 10 most destructive plant lists across like many lists that people have made across the world. And when we look at these plants, we can immediately also imagine the kind of habitats that these plants are found in. So for example, when I think of Lantana, I can immediately imagine a deciduous forest with a grassy understory, which is slowly being replaced by Lantana. Or when I think of Chromalina odorata, I think of a roadside, which is slightly shaded, or some other part of a forest which has a big canopy gap. And you see lots of Chromalina over there. Water hyacinth, of course, colonizes stagnant and moving water bodies. When we think of Prosopis, we can think of arid and semi-arid regions, lots of rocks, dunes maybe in the background. When we think of Scotch broom, I think of the Nilgiris and the Shola, habitat that has been invaded by Scotch broom. And Mycenia micrantha in closed canopy evergreen forests. That's where Mycenia grows. So this is just a very small list of invasive plants and the kinds of habitats that they occupy. And this they've been able to do over a period of time. The invasion history of these 6 plants is a minimum of 80 years and a maximum of a little over 200 years. Why is this important? It's because, these plants have found their niche in a new region where they were not evolutionarily present. And they've managed to find this combination of environmental factors where they work best. And this list of plants is by no means exhaustive. is just a representative list of invasive plants that we find across the country and the different kinds of habitats that they can occupy. Now, in 80 to 200 years, it's very easy to quickly start forming ecological interactions with other species. Some of the most better known examples of invasion interactions with other species is their impacts on biodiversity, which there are reams and reams of papers on this, on how invasive plants reduce native plant biodiversity across different types of ecoregions, habitats, terrestrial and aquatic species also happen to have the same kinds of impacts on biodiversity. But what are some of the other types of associations that invasive species can form over these time periods that then make things like restoration and management a little bit more complicated? The first thing is that plants produce flowers, which are often great resources for generalist pollinators. So, for example, everybody's favorite invasive plant, Lantana camara, is currently a nectar host plant for more than 30 lepidopteran species. And this is why it is also a favorite for people to plant in butterfly parks, because it attracts so many butterfly species for nectaring. But interestingly, more recently, it's also been identified as a larval host plant for 3 lepidopteran species. Now, this may be a good news because finally, maybe there might be a herbivore that utilizes Lantana as a resource and may actually affect things like biomass, longevity, and other traits of Lantana. So basically, this particular plant has now become part of the diet of 33 lepidopteran species. Similarly, if you look at another example, Prosopis juliflora, which was intentionally introduced to arid regions as a fodder plant, it's now been co-opted by several herbivorous ungulates in this landscape as food. The pods are tasty, they are sweetish and fleshy. So it's great in that kind of habitat, right? It has high water content. So ungulates like cattle and blackbuck utilize this resource very well. And this has, of course, helped in the dispersal and establishment of Prosopis in areas which it was not intended to be present in. A very cool thing that happens is in the case of black bucks, where the males form these reproductive leks, where they have these really tiny territories that they defend, and they all display together in an open, often no vegetation area. So they stay there for a long time, and they often have these huge dung piles that accumulate within their territories. And these dung piles are also where the Prosopis seeds are landing. So which means that Prosopis seeds and seedlings are now going to areas which were otherwise open, and they have now the potential to convert that open landscape into a woody plant landscape, maybe 20, 30, 40 years down the line. So this particular plant has not just managed to colonize, but it's also in the long run likely to modify how the landscape looks. Apart from this, there are lots of ecosystem processes that many of these plants have changed, possibly irreversibly. So how fires interact with the ecosystem across many forest areas, many managed areas in the country has been changed because of the presence of woody invasive species. Nitrogen fixing invasive species change how nitrogen is cycled in the soil. There are other species that modify how water is circulated in the soil. So within a span of just 80 to 200 years, there are a lot of very dramatic ecosystem level changes happening. Again, I would like to say that these are potentially irreversible. So what does that mean? I'd like to highlight a case study of Lantana camara and sort of build a case for an approach at the end of my talk. So let's delve into the main thought process here, that some invasive alien plants have been here for a long time. And yet, as humans, when we tend to think of them in terms of management or restoration, we approach them as if they were new invaders. Something that's been around for 200 years, we still think of as, it came 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and we can manage these two different types of species the same way. So going to the example of Lantana camara, in 200 years of its existence in India, Lantana has covered an estimated 3.3 million hectares of land and 44% of forest area. And yet, when we think of managing Lantana, it's mostly removal. And oftentimes we think that whatever removal has happened, recolonization will not happen. Oftentimes the management action is very short-sighted in that way. So we tried to understand how this managed areas might actually be recolonized by Lantana, assuming that the management practices are actually 100% effective. Meaning management practices are typically uprooting of Lantana or cutting the Lantana stem below the soil surface such that it destroys the regenerating meristem and kills the plant. So if there are these very effective methods of killing Lantana, where is new Lantana coming in from in managed areas? So we decided to look at how generalist fruit-eating birds associate themselves with Lantana, and are they in fact bringing back seedlings of seeds of Lantana back into managed areas. And we did a small study where we looked at how 10 fleshy fruited species which have fruits that look very similar to Lantana and probably have very similar nutritional composition to Lantana, how they were eaten by generalist frugivorous birds in a semi-arid landscape. And we found that 3 bulbul species, the red-whiskered bulbul, red-vented bulbul, and white-browed bulbul, these 2 species are extremely common pretty much everywhere, whereas the white-browed bulbul is locally very common in that particular region where I did the study. So these 3 very generalist fruit-eating species were consuming the fruits of Lantana camara. And this is interesting to note because possibly when these other native fruit-bearing species were not producing fruit, perhaps Lantana was provisioning these species with fruits. So this is an association that is there to stay because nutritionally, Lantana is beneficial to at least 3 very generalist fruit-eating species of birds. Now, we also wanted to look at how bulbuls may be bringing in Lantana seeds back into managed areas. And for this, we actually took an approach where we monitored the movement of bulbuls, and we combined that information with how much time does a seed stay in a bulbul's stomach, which is known as gut passage time. We combined these 2 types of information to in a simulation framework to get a distribution of area to which or length to which a seed can be removed from a parent plant and deposited. And this is known as a dispersal kernel for a plant. And this is what we found. If you look at this graph, the y-axis is frequency, or the frequency of occurrence of a seed in that particular distance class. And on the x-axis is the distance from a parent plant that a seed can be dispersed by a bulbul. And if you see, most of the seeds actually fall pretty close to the parent plant here. And very few seeds fall very far away from the parent plant, up to 700 meters from the parent plant. Now, what is interesting about this particular frequency distribution is that this firstly agrees with some other reported range of distances to which seeds are deposited by bulbuls. And secondly, if you notice this blue arrow, 20.7 meters, this is the average distance of a managed area from a parent plant, or average distance of a managed area from a flowering and fruiting Lantana plant. So which is bang in the middle of this large class of distances where most seeds are likely to fall, which means that our management action is removing plants only a short distance, and that distance is not long enough to keep away bulbuls from dispersing seeds into that area. So what this means is that because of these ecological processes that have taken place in the last 80 to 200 years, we cannot approach the problem of a long-established invasive species the same way we approach the problem of a recent invasive species, because animals have already formed these collaborations with these plants, and they might render all management action ineffective. So in the light of this particular example, I would like to propose a small framework in which we can approach management of an invasive species in a more optimal fashion. So for this, I'll use a cartoon illustration. Imagine that this squiggly line represents a landscape. On this landscape, there are two halves. There is this side, which is yellow, and this side, which is gray. And what do these colors represent? They represent some regime of fire, soil quality, water, biodiversity, mutualistic interactions, a bunch of these ecological factors. And what we have to remember is that the yellow side of things are very different from the gray side of things. Now, supposing we have a little ecosystem represented by this blue ball, which we are interested in conserving. And there's a little bit of a push that's coming in from newly introduced invasive alien species. It makes a lot of sense at this point of time to invest a lot of effort, money, and manpower in early detection and eradication of an invasive alien species, because we can preempt the future ecological trouble that this particular species may be able to cause. So at this particular point of time, we can maybe think of eradication. But when do we actually detect invasive alien species? They are probably at some other place over here. An ecosystem probably has reached its very ends of the range of ecosystem function metrics when we actually detect an invasive alien species. But if we put in some timely management at this point of time, what is management? We prevent further spread of the species through removal, and we also restore that particular habitat with suitable replacement species that can mitigate loss of the invasive species. So supposing we caught Lantana at this point of time, and we remove Lantana, we replace it with other species that have Lantana-like seeds, and that the bulbuls can quickly switch to feeding. So management here would include removal and restoration. But what happens if an invasive alien species has changed an ecosystem so much that it is in a completely different regime of ecosystem processes, and it's not reversible? Means that no matter how much eradication or management approaches we take, it's not possible to move this ecosystem back into its previous state. At this point of time, we should consider adaptation. And what is adaptation? It is to best recognize that this particular species is now part of the ecosystem. And we then approach the problem of this species, I guess, in a very contextual, ecologically contextualized manner, and use a range of approaches to deal with this particular species. For example, if in some landscape, it is possible to actually reduce the population size through removal, that's where we apply that. But in another landscape where it's going to be impossible to reduce the population by removal, we just deal with it. We just accept it as a part of the ecosystem. And with that, maybe triggering of a hornet's nest, I will like to end my talk. Thank you. I hope I was audible and my slides were seen throughout.
Yes, Geetha, they were all you were audible, and they will be we could see all your slides. Thank you so much for sharing. I think because in the interest of time, we'll just move on to the next speaker right now, and then we'll take up the questions that you might have for Geetha and the panel discussion afterwards. So next, I think we would like to invite Dr. Rohan Shetti. Dr. Rohan Shetti is an associate professor and a postdoctoral research student, scientist at the University of Ústí nad Labem, Czech Republic. Rohan, please correct me if I've mispronounced the name. He's also the co-founder of The Green Concept, a firm that works in applied ecology, carbon assessments, and ecosystem restoration. So I think I'd hand it over to Rohan to present and take this discussion forward. Thank you, Rohan.
Thank you so much, Arjunji. Just let me know when my screen is visible, and I'll start from there. Okay. Firstly, thank you everybody at the ERA network, all the participants and the organizers. Today, I'm kind of very happy to see all of these talks because somehow from both the talks before me, I see the different dots connecting together. Somewhere, my research group has also worked extensively with traits, especially plant traits, across the circumpolar Arctic. That is something that my research group here in Europe focuses on, understanding the response of vegetation to climate change, wherein vegetation is actually invading the northern parts of the Arctic. There's a vegetation shift towards higher altitudes and higher latitudes. So how vegetation moves or migrates in an ecosystem is something that we closely monitor and model. So that's one part of my work. Second part is how this changes different things in carbon fluxes, and how a certain species can shape an ecosystem, and the ecosystem in itself is also responding to a certain species. So this interaction is something my group over here closely looks at. So today what I'm going to do is slightly stepping aside from being a hard scientist, I would like to share a few restoration stories. Now, these stories come one part directly from observation, two, wherein we have actively done or dealt with these species or are having active restoration projects. So today, actually, I want to share our problems and our questions and our learnings. So what I'm hoping from today's discussion is that the discussion will actually continue post presentation, and I would love to hear from all of you, because I believe that we are still searching for answers. So I'm here to present what our scenarios look like. Maybe you have some solutions, and maybe we might have some solutions for you. So, okay, let me quickly dive in. So the four pictures you see over here are the four different types of vegetation that I'm going to speak about. The first one, I will start with Norway spruce. I know the examples, like two examples are not from India. They are from here in Europe, but they are fairly complex and interesting examples because they kind of have many layers of problems. And I would like to shed light on these problems because maybe as restoration practitioners, you might somewhere associate with some layer or many layers of these problems. So the first example will be that of Norway spruce. Second is the eucalyptus that we see in India. I'll just draw a few parallels of what are the behavioral similarities between spruce and eucalyptus and why I see that it is a thing of concern. Then I will just take an example of the common castor that we see around. And then a small example of Indigofera hirsuta, which was a fairly invasive species in southern United States where we used to work. Through the talk, I will share two things: what we did as restoration efforts, where we went wrong, so that you can avoid the mistakes that we did, and what is our learning outcome till now. And please feel free to add on it. Please feel free to say that if something needed to be done differently, we are open to all sorts of comments, criticism, and we would like to learn together. Okay, so let me dive into the Norway spruce example. Okay, so before actually getting into the spruce, I would like to draw your attention to two behaviors. I think these are critical to understand when we say that a species is invading a certain space and time. So an invasion is basically an occupancy of certain space and time. So let's kind of roll back a little bit and try to dive towards the roots of when a plant community actually occupies a certain space and time. So we all know the concepts of pioneering, and we all know the concepts of invasion. let's take a moment to think about what are the commonalities and the differences between the two, because there are some commonalities and there are some differences. So what happens, as Megha ji already spoke about traits. Traits are very critical for any plant to establish itself. We actually have a paper on traits that exactly looks at leaf dry matter content and leaf surface area and stem heights, which have been critical for establishment of plant communities in the northern subarctic. These traits have helped shift entire vegetation lines into the glacial zones, which is now becoming a threat to the Arctic. So now this shift, could we think of this, because this is happening kind of as a new migration post glaciation, should we look at this as an invasion or a pioneering shift? It's not an easy answer. I'm just leaving out questions. The common thing to both of them is the rapid conquest, but there's a difference between the two. A pioneering species actually paves way for other species to follow. What you see as a small picture over here is that of Indopoa. It is a small grass in the Western Ghats. It absolutely grows on bare rock, but it changes the nutrition in the ecosystem in such a way that other species can follow. So what is this interaction that actually allows this change? I want you to park these questions somewhere at the back of your mind. I will answer some of these as we get towards the end of the presentation. Second part is invasion. Why invasion is so concerning is because it does cause a lot of biodiversity loss. In many cases, there are no natural enemies, or there's little resilience or resistance from the local ecosystem that actually helps a new species to establish. But what is it in the ecosystem that has actually let this change happen? What has changed in the ecosystem to accept the new invader to come in? So somewhere I would like to request all of you to park these questions in your head, and let's get to them as we get to the later parts of the discussion. We all know how uh, how in ecological behavior R and K dynamics work. So R, for those of you who don't know, just a quick whistle top tour. R kind of way is many individuals, short-lived, that can change the ecosystem chemically and drastically. Whereas K way of living is less individuals, long-lived, but more complex individuals that will live in an ecosystem. So usually in an ecosystem, when things pioneer, the first way of life is the R way, wherein the species establishes itself with many individuals and then follows the more complex K type of organisms, which are long-lived but have lesser individuals. Somewhere keep these concepts floating in your mind, because I'm going to address them as we follow. Now, let me talk a little bit about Norway spruce. Norway spruce is a very interesting case study because it has got a historical shift into different ecosystems. B, it has a strong note of human intervention, which has led to management and mismanagement practices. And C, how it has led to further levels of invasion is something that we'll see. So around 6,500 years ago, Norway spruce started its northward and eastward migration. Now, what were originally cold boreal forests, which included largely pinus species, betula or ulna species, mixed with a little bit of Tilia cordata, slowly started getting invaded by the Norway spruce. The reason was, A, there was more water availability. B, spruce could tolerate slightly warmer temperatures, anoxic conditions at the soil, and also more acidic soils generally. Now, what happened is eventually spruce started getting more and more successful because spruce needles fall off and they make the soil more acidic, making it fine for more spruce to follow. Furthermore, eventually, what happened is spruce started invading the beech and the oak territories that we have now in northern and central Europe. Most of this data comes from reconstructed timeline series of pollen and dendro ecological analysis. So they are so the source of this data is fairly robust, and we can definitely say that the migration of Norway spruce started some 6,000 years ago. Now, it's important to note that the mixed forests that were present had very weak resistance towards Norway spruce. Okay, so Norway spruce is Picia abies. In the presentation, it might both the terms might be used interchangeably. So just be aware of that. But it was a local water availability that was critical for the migration of this species. Now comes the point of time today. What you see in green over here is actually the distribution of Norway spruce. So spruce has actually had a massive extent of invasion towards the north. A key factor, what makes it successful, that it can live in very low nutritional conditions. It's got a fair tolerance to heat, which was a point of advantage a few hundred years back. But the same point of advantage is now turning against spruce. I'll get to that shortly. Towards World War I and World War II, what happened was what was previously a beech and a oak forest was highly modified by spruce plantations across Central Europe, because spruce is a dry wood, it is very timber efficient, it can grow in highly acidic soils, and it was very good to drive the industrial and the war machinery. Came the end of World War II, a lot of Central European forests were converted from beech oak forests to spruce forests. Now, towards Central Europe, there was a lot of heavy industry that actually fueled the war. And spruce was a critical element of the fuel of this industry. Now, just a couple of months a couple of months back, we published a research for the European Federation, wherein we looked at close to 89 sites across Central Europe. My research group was commissioned to actually have a look at how forest growth has been responding to pollution and climate change together. Now, something that was an invader has got new fast changing variables that it has to deal with. So what you see over here is a little a plate from a tree core or a spruce core. What you see over here are annual rings, and what we have computed using different mathematical models is the tree ring width distance between various rings. Now, this is just an example of one core. We have sampled close to 9,000 trees across Central Europe. So our sample size is fairly robust when we have a certain claim, which I will say. So we saw that from the early 1970s to the early 1990s, there was a massive reduction in the radial growth of spruce. Now, one might think that how does this little reduction matter? Well, it matters because think of it that this reduction is happening to close to 4,000 trees. Now, reduction in radial growth, think of this in terms of reduction of carbon sequestration. It just brings in a lot of new arguments together. What I'm trying to point out over here is, say, something like change in nutrition, change in pollution, change in chemical loading in an ecosystem can drastically change how species respond to the changes. What we saw that, so we had a general tree health monitoring system put in place. It is still in place. We saw that most of the reduction happened because of leaf and root damage, because of severe soil acidification, and also acid rains that came from the 1970s to the 1990s. Now you'll also see that there's a recovery period over here. Post 1990s, there were a lot of changes in the environmental policies. So it took about 9 years for the ecosystem to respond to severe changes that we brought about in Central Europe. So there were many drives of reliming the soils. Also, in many situations, soils were recalcified to make them more alkaline, and then actually forest growth started improving. Now, spruce, which was an invader, has been invaded by new problems. Now, what you see over here, all of these photos are taken by either me or a few of my colleagues. So what you see over here in this corner, it is a spruce forest gone completely brown because of the bark beetle. So the bark beetle invaded the spruce. So an invader is now getting invaded by a biological mechanism. Now one might say, well, isn't that kind of a good thing? But what is really concerning is that more than 80% of forests in the Czech Republic and the German border regions are spruce forests. 58% of these forests are completely now died out, which is a massive number. Now, we were commissioned to put the report together and finally come up with a restoration strategy. Now, just from Geethaji's slide, we saw what happens when an ecosystem is spilled over a certain tipping point. We also saw from Meghaji's slides what happens when naturally occurring traits are not available to a species to establish itself, and then you're topped by completely changing pollution and environmental conditions. What you see over here is a picture of forest fire. It's actually from our site last year. 6 of our sites got burnt in the forest fires between Germany and the Czech Republic. So what has happened is, A, the system changed wherein the spruce could shift. B, spruce got established because of human intervention and bolstering. C, spruce got invaded, but this invasion is now dangerous because if 58% of your forests go away, some forest is better than no forest. Now we have got open lands completely with black stumps and dead animals, and it is not easy to restore it because oaks and beeches, which were the occupants of these ecosystems, they find it hard to grow over here because the soils are very acidic. So when we have to plan our strategy, we already see that it's very late. So it's not easy to come up with an easy solution for a few thousand hectares. And that's where we are open to the world to kind of give us suggestions or come up with ideas or engage with us. Now, let me take this slightly ahead. So what are we doing now? The way we are addressing is we are trying to bring back the native species, which is largely the beech, the oaks, the maples, the acers. But an important lesson for all of us to share a few of our mistakes is that the most critical component that we are now addressing is the soil, the water, and the nutrition correction, because a lot of the soils have got a lot of pollution because of the industrialization that took place in Central Europe. If we are to correct the ecosystem, the critical part is to correct our vision first. You might be surprised to know that at least 30 years back, most of the European ecologists knew what disaster they are walking into. The greatest problem that we had was that of inaction for a very long time. So 2-3 decades back, if these forests were addressed by oak and beech plantations, perhaps today's scenario would have been something different. Now, let me kind of draw a few examples or a few similarities to what we see with the Indian eucalyptus today. Both spruce and eucalyptus kind of alter the soil very drastically. I mean, most of you are ecologists over here. Most of you know that Eucalyptus can over abstract water from an ecosystem. As far as you're feeding it as far as one is feeding it enough water, it is a beautiful monster that grows. But eventually, when there is no water, it is going to render an ecosystem fairly hostile for either a new invader to come in or a good quality pioneer to mutate itself to rehabit an ecosystem. So another part, both spruce and eucalyptus have got a lot of costly post-plantation processing. Both have been successful invaders by human bolstering. That is something, I mean, one can say it is because of industry or the British got it to India. And there are many stories, all are true in a certain level, but it is something that needs to be addressed. Because come tomorrow, if I am in the spruce situation, comparing it to the eucalyptus forests in India, if there is a bark beetle like attack, or if there is a forest fire because of heavy warming, absolutely no trees is a worse situation than some trees. So I am not an advocate of eucalyptus, but I just hope that we don't end up in our spruce like situation. So yes, invasions do happen, but but from here I've also seen that a lot of ill policy decisions have rendered the ecosystems more devastated. Now, there is some commonality between spruce and eucalyptus. What I'm trying to draw your attention to over here is we all know that Castor has come to India quite some time back. Already, the previous speakers have said that not everything that is alien is actually invasive. This is already fairly naturalized. It is all Castor has its uses in oil and medicinal products, and it has its place in our ecosystem now. Let me draw a few observations that we have. Again, there is no paper published about this, but it's an observation that I'm sharing from my notes. You can see if this is true. If this is not true, please do write back to me. I always see that this plant grows very well in polluted spots. Now, what gets me actually wondering is what is it about pollution that invites this species in? What is it about bioindication that this species has to offer? Something that I've been discussing with quite some senior restoration ecologists, or in a way my mentors. They would always say that wherever there is pollution / nutrition in a ecosystem which is unused, that is where new species find their common space. It's something that has been at the back of my mind, and it's always something that I see in the ecosystem, but it's an observation that I'm sharing. Another example, Indigofera hirsuta, it is common in Africa, it's also common in India, but it is fairly invasive in the US. So back in the US, when we were working in the Panhandle, so the Panhandle area is basically Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Texas. This is a fairly invasive species. Now, what we have learned is before I joined the project over there, the local companies used to use a lot of weed killers. They used to have controlled fire burns, because fire burns is something that is commonly used over there. They've got a very aggressive restoration policy. What has actually happened is that because of weed killers, there have been new invaders coming into the ecosystem. The situation actually got worse. In the years that I joined, there were a lot of conferences that discussed this plant. Finally, I'm still in touch with the companies over there, and now we see a very nice solution to this was a simple act of bolstering the native seed banks into the soil seed bank. So basically, what a lot of restoration ecologists have done is that they have taken the local seeds and over many seasons they have kind of put the seeds back into the soil seed bank by turning over the soil. Now there are enough native seeds in the soil seed bank, and that's where just the natives have slowly outgrown the Indigofera over there. So active removal does work. but using a chemical treatment like weed killers or just mulching the ground without thinking, it has its own effects, but they are more like allopathy, wherein you are just treating the symptom and not the cause. So yes, finally, let me pose this question, because this is something that we discuss in the SER also quite commonly, that what sort of restoration strategy should one have? Should we go for aggressive tree removals? Should we go for burning, weedicides, mulchers, or should we have absolutely a strategy where we are doing a rewilding and having faith that nature will take its course? What is best for us? Well, my generic learning that I'm sharing is that it is always context specific. Where you are in your ecosystem is something that you must evaluate, and only then start with your restoration actions. So just to kind of share a few common understandings that we have, that vegetation shifts do happen when there is available nutrition bandwidth in an ecosystem. Nutrition and pollution. See, one of my professors would always say that nutrition and pollution are both opinions. In truth, there are only chemicals. Plants use them or plants don't use them. So keep that somewhere at the back of your mind when you are planning your strategy. Furthermore, R and K strategies, both in plants, have their place in the ecosystem. So what one must aim for is to see where are the common spaces where the natives and exotics, or natives and invaders, are sharing the common space, and what is giving the invaders the ecosystem edge to go over the natives. Finally, from the different restoration projects and monitoring projects that I've been a part of, I would suggest to use biological controls before going in for any aggressive measures. As Geetha ji said, address your ecosystems on time, have good quality surgical approaches. So surgical approaches, just to give you context, that means that do proper removals on time so that you can avoid landscape level changes. So yeah, we are, so in our example of spruce, we have now ended up with landscape level changes, and this is something that could have been avoided. So yeah, the final take home message is that invasions don't happen without a reason. There's always an ecosystem story behind, and the more you get, the more parts you get of the story, the better it will get for your restoration approach. Have a holistic approach. It is better to treat the cause than finally to deal with the effect. So with that, I would like to thank you all for your time and attention. Yeah, in case you have to contact us, our research projects in India are working under the name of the Green Concept Initiative. And yeah, I look forward to a very nice discussion, and hopefully this was insightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rohan, for sharing about your work and kind of taking us through your journey, as well as sharing tips about how people should approach, and sharing those the opinions on how do we start working with restoration, and how do we look at a holistic approach. Um, so I am. This is Arjun here. I know Suprabha's name is here. I've also added and Arjun. So I'll quickly introduce Suprabha, who's the next speaker. So don't get confused. But thank you, Rohan, for that. And I just want to quickly introduce Suprabha, and then we will break out into a panel discussion after Suprabha's talk. So about Suprabha, Suprabha is a rainforest conservationist and heads the Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary. It's a collectively owned private reserve devoted to plant conservation, habitat restoration, nature education, and ecological advocacy. She explores how decisions arise out of social, ecological, and political frameworks, and out of the particular values of individuals and groups with enormous consequences of the land. So I'm going to hand it over to Suprabha now to share about her thoughts on invasive alien species, and then we will take it forward from there. Yeah. Over to you, Suprabha.
Thanks, Arjun. I guess I have to share my screen now.
Yes.
So I have this dubious title of practitioner, and some of that is I really feel that in the instance of plants and restoration, we're all sort of in this thing together. We apply our understanding and also operate out of a concern. And I just like to say that we're all on the same page there, I'm hoping, and it's out of concern that we are doing this. One of the things about living amongst a lot of plants at this place called the Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary at the edge of a forest in Wayanad is that, and I've been here 30 years, and I'm in a community where people are growing different things, everything from ornamental plants to food plants and perennials and annuals, and the core concern has been native biodiversity, the extinction, I would say actually the extermination of native biodiversity. And there's a very wild feral sort of landscape where there is an old growth forest on one side, and then there is this this landscape, this mosaic of different sorts of cultivation practices, and also roadsides and neglected plantations and so on. So my landscape from which I'm speaking is just this, it's extremely diverse. And I've seen what I believe is world making at the level of, in a pot, for instance, where a number just climb onto your endemic impatiens that you are protecting in a pot, and then they sort of diversify it. And then you see the endemic impatiens jumping out of the pot and then diversifying something that could be borderline part exotic, and then this whole sense of the landscape also having fairly severe challenges, actually to be broken by roads, by chemicals, by invasive practices, which come largely from an urban industrial culture. So I'm kind of drawing a line between all the plant people and then all the technocratic, and I would say technopathic people. So that's my line. And this is open to question and open to discussion. And I'm hoping, just while I remember it, that all of us who are on this call from the ERA, and particularly, the ERA steering committee and so on, that please do visit, please do come to these places in Wayanad and Annamalais and Auroville and Tiruvannamalai and so on, where we can actually look at some of these things together and talk through some of these things together. So this is my operant narrative. And, the world at one point was a biodiverse whole, even if it had all these interruptions like volcanic eruptions and mass extinctions and so on. There was some kind of an organic evolutionary tapestry that has brought us to this wonderful world. And at some point, there's this challenge posed by a particular kind of modus operandi that a particular kind of human being has brought to bear on the whole planet. Actually, it is not just in a few places where civilization began, it also has spread. And not only the civilization of the past, it's the current civilization, which is the thing. The way I think of it is that it has a lot of authoritarian techniques, which is the machines that run around and direct so much of what we do. It's also a war-mongering civilization. And it has as two major things that it does on the surface of the land area is monoculture agriculture, and it has mining, to name two things. And so this is the red in this on the left-hand side. I put this little boat in with. Sorry, this was done on on the PowerPoint. using little signs here and there. I'm not very skilled at this sort of thing. But basically the reduction of pretty much the biosphere into these refugia. Yeah, so that has been happening for about 10,000 years, because the very beginning of monocultures was, in my opinion, the ghettoization of nature, of the forests and the wetlands and the rivers and so on. So there is a long history of destruction. It is not a new thing, and it is global at this point. So then is what I would call the current phase, which is experiencing some kind of an elementalization, which is that the living world is being made into some kind of a metallic and toxic and plastic world. And it has resulted in drawdown and overshoot. It has resulted in ecocide, and obviously we know about genocide. It has resulted in over 100,000 chemicals, in the air and the water and the soil. So pollution of a scale, that boggles the mind. It has turned the climate. It has decimated habitat. 93% of the Western Ghats. I mean, I don't know what the latest figure is. I've been saying this forever, so it must be higher than that. But over 90% of the Western Ghat biome is converted to industrial scale plantations and roads and urbanizations. And then you obviously have what's called wasteland, and then this rampant new disease. So this is the scenario, this is the current scenario. And I believe, there's this old saying which says forests precede civilization and deserts dog its heels. And that's what I tried to show in the first part of this, on the first left-hand side of the slide. And where I have been increasingly of the opinion, though I don't want to conclude it, it's a question mark, is that those plants deemed invasive are actually responding to the consequence of a culture that has swept the planet and created this enormous catastrophe. So if you think that there's over 300 million hectares of agricultural land in India, that is a lot of land that has been converted to monocultures, maybe some polycultures, but it's basically monocultures. And if you think that, I don't know how many thousands of tons of fertilizer are thrown into the landscape as a result of that. If you think of roads which fragment habitat, and if you think of the hundreds of millions of vehicles that are on the landscape, then it seems to me that I want to turn my attention to who is actually dealing with that. And I believe increasingly, again, I don't want to conclude this, it's a question mark, that those who are sequestering carbon, because carbon fertilization of the atmosphere, carbon emissions and increased CO2 and all that, and the enormous amount of nitrates in all these agricultural areas that are entering the waters and also the soils and surrounding Nagarhole, Bandipur, etc. So it's affected the water and in the air. So who are the ones who are dealing with that directly? And I think a lot of these fast-growing plants are the ones who are actually dealing with that, including soil remediation. So what I've been observing in this corner of Wayanad is that many of these plants which seem to behave in this understory way in Bandipur and so on, they do that here, but they also then move on, because once tree species grow underneath them and through them and over them, the Lantana moves on, and then what you have is a secondary forest full of interesting native species. So what is the role of Lantana in this landscape? Because is it this bad thing that is entering pristine forests? And what is pristine forests when you have the kind of fragmentation that is happening, when you have climate change that is happening? Is it that it's destroying biodiversity? But if you compare it with asphalt and tar, and cement, it seems to me that it is actually increasing biodiversity, because that's the comparison that I have started to make these days, which is not the comparison with the old forest, but the comparison with tarmac and concrete. So I'm hoping that with time, that if the plants that we are protecting at the Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary kind of creep out under these fast-moving plants, and with protection and stopping of industrial scale activities, and of course, who's going to do that, that actually something resembling a native, diverse, healthy biome could emerge at the other end. And this will be also people inclusive, because the traditional peoples of these landscapes do know something about that. So out of the right end, we see the animals and the rivers and, you know, the plants coming out of this remediating work that many of these fast-moving plants, I believe, are currently doing. So how I have been approaching the question of restoration is that every place that is protected, every place that, you know, all those of us who've been living and caring for native plants, and we do all this work to either plant them, have nurseries, plant them out, that these are little arcs. They're, you know, in our instance, in the Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary, it's actually pretty feisty. It's got a lot happening. There's even some local climate, and it's very, very diverse. It has got people trying to live in it and from it. And, you know, the arc could be anything. It can expand the concept to deep sea vents where you have thermophilic bacteria, to restoration zones, to permaculture gardens, to anywhere where diversity, fecundity, succession, and, you know, pushing back on those disruptive practices that the industrial culture is, you know, is actually it's getting worse by the hour. So the arc concept has been used, and it has been used for this place which I'm part of, and it is simply that that the bundle of beings, or the pods of life, that are going to make it through this catastrophe. And I would like to propose that many of those first responders to climate change are not antagonistic to this process, but actually contagonistic. If any of us read fiction, then we know that contagonists are these, you know, these characters who actually aid the mission of the protagonist. So this is, you know, a friend of mine was trying to help me visualize what this feisty pod of life, or what this arc might look like. And I said, it's actually a little piece of continental crust, and you put everybody into it, and it's just, everybody's bringing their best friend, and they're all climbing onto it. And it, you know, it has its own biosphere going, and this is what will sail through climate chaos. This is imagination maybe going overboard, but I am witness to it in this little corner of Wayanad, which not only in our place, but also in the neighboring area, seems to be going through some kind of a resurgence of life. And this is evident in, you know, left alone plantations, in new types of plantings, and is gone from what was a lemongrass dominated landscape in the human areas to something that is more of a tree-covered biome. And what we're doing is actually to investigate, where do the mosses go? Where do the liverworts go? Where do the little orchids go? You know, how does the forest step out from its, you know, industrial cage? Where does it actually explore new territory? And who are its allies? So this is just a little, you know, slide to show you the different sorts of vegetation types on the land base that we care for here. And everything that is pink is and red is spreading, and pink is you know, exotic. The greens are native, and then you have the crop. So it's a place where different ecologies mingle, but it's also a place where human beings live. And it's a place that is diversifying, you know, year by year. There's just more happening in this little landscape. So this could be a proposal for any other landscape which has, people living in it, and where in India do you not have people living in it? And if you don't look at agriculture, then what you're going to get is this kind of corralling of protected areas where everybody starts to fight each other, elephants and roads and night traffic, and meanwhile the industrial waste is actually pouring or flooding through these landscapes. So this is a more advanced version done by one of the NCF folk, who's also an old Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary friend, Madhavan. He recently came and tried to analyze this all the different types of vegetation here by age and by species diversity. I'm going to, can I just get out of this? And so how do I do that? So yeah, I'll continue talking while Arjun gets the screen back. Stop share. Yeah. So, when you have the kind of colossal impact of what appears to be an invasive culture with its methods and methodologies, I wonder if we are looking at a ghost in the whole invasive logic, which is that it is not to say that we shouldn't remove Lantana. I'm not at all saying that, but it seems 20 million acres of Lantana across India is still small compared to 300 million acres of tomatoes and cabbages and tobacco and sugarcane and so on. And you can say that those are food crops, but the food crops bring with them very destructive practices, and we need to address that. And I haven't even brought in climate, which is a huge topic. I'm just interested at this point in presenting fragmentation and toxification as the main drivers of biodiversity loss, and the potential alliance with verbinaceae. So for instance, I've been looking at Lantana. It's a smelly plant. It's pungent and thorny, and it seems to grow very strongly in areas where perhaps herbivores are also having to gather in because of the habitat fragmentation. So there's a lot of movement of herbivores back into protected areas, and the land itself throws up a thorny, pungent defense to excess herbivory. It could also be the same for senna, which is on the one hand moving through these areas, but on the other hand, these areas have a lot of nitrates. I mean, that really needs to be looked at, which is the washing of the soil and the waters with millions of tons of fertilizers, pesticides, and industrial effluents. So are these plants actually mitigating that? And I think Rohan actually alluded and spoke quite extensively about that in his talk. So the final point I want to just end this talk with is that willy-nilly, those of us who've been in the front of this native species conservation, habitat restoration, we love these places, we love these plants, but there is we get a lot of visitors at Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary. It is also really disturbing to me that people who have had no background with either gardening or say horticulture, or what it actually takes to to diversify a landscape, that the first thing that they almost start these days, it's more and more that people come, so why do you have these exotics here? Or so why do you have eupatorium here? Or why haven't you taken it out? And to that point, I would like to say something very practical, which is that perhaps we're one of the longest weeding operations in the country, with 50 years of weeding behind us. And also that, the amount of money and time and the care with which areas have been, changed and transformed in terms of who lives there and who doesn't, to get a young person coming out of, I don't know, Azim Premji University or a school and just immediately labeling plants as invasive, exotic, the bad guys, makes me feel that it's not very different from some of the things that we are doing at a human scale, labeling the good and the bad ones. So I feel that I would question that logic, because the work of plants, no matter where they come from, is something to be understood and observed. If we don't observe, if we don't live amongst all these, then we are applying a rather cold logic, which has its own language and its own consequences. We use machinery, we have used chemicals also, but the idea that at large scales that, men with machetes are going to be growing through places, or, bulldozers and chemicals, weedicides, that is just really alarming, that it could actually result in that kind of behavior. And the careful observation that many of us have been doing for many years, and the ERA Alliance has some old timers in it. The care with which we have operated and planted and observed and included people and tried to be gentle, and at the same time to ask questions. So I would like to bring that into the middle of our discussion, to restore a climate of discussion before we label the ones as good and bad. Because compared to me, for sure, sitting here with Arjun and our machinery, a plant outside which may or may not belong to this landscape, which might be responding to some chemicals we've put into the soil, or living there and feeding some butterflies, it seems to me that I should go and not that plant. So I'm going to end here, and thank you so much for listening. There's a good crowd, and I'm hoping that we can sustain this conversation over several sessions. And I'm going to hand it over to Arjun now to tell us what we're going to do next, and hoping that we can have a good discussion for those who are still here with us.
Oh, thanks, Suprabha. I was going to the unmute and I realized that, of course, I don't need to do that anymore. So thanks, Suprabha, for sharing, just putting in, opening up with so many questions, and really just trying to broaden the scope of how we think around how we think about invasive alien species and in our context. Right? So I think this is a good time to also now step into a panel discussion. I know we've run over time quite a bit. I think we are a good 15 minutes or 25 minutes late, but I'm hoping we can start the discussion. And if people can stick around for some more time, that will be great, especially the panelists. And we can take from there. Yeah, but I'll open it up for a panel discussion.
Sure.
Yeah. And Suprabha will be both moderator and panelist, and I'll probably step in once in a while. Yeah. So over to you again, Sir.
Ask if there are any questions.
Are there any specific questions that if people have, you can also put in the chat and we can take it up? Or yeah, or if you have right now and you want to unmute and ask, you can do that immediately before we start into the panel. Yeah, Sneha, please go.
My question is more directed to Geetha, but anybody can answer. I was wondering, what are the if there are any studies on what are the how do long-lived species like elephants respond to this rapid change in ecosystems due to lantana and other plants?
Yeah, thanks for that question. There have been a few studies looking at how lantana might affect forage for elephants. And I think it's largely reducing the diversity of forage species. But additionally, also the space that large forages like elephants might require, that is also on average reducing. And some people have found correlations with increased usage of human areas because of loss of that area in forest regions.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Neha. Thanks, Geetha. So I think what we are thinking of right now is we'll just open it out for questions. Megha, do you want to add anything at this point?
No,
No.
No.
Megha responded to that question. Oh, Geetha. Okay.
Okay. And next, I think Akshay had raised his hand. So Akshay, would you unmute and ask your question? Thanks.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. This was a very interesting set of talks relevant to what I'm interested in. So I have a couple of questions. I'll keep it short. First of all, thank you, Suprabha, for the valuable perspective on the perception of invasives. I thought that was very interesting and needed. I have a question specifically for Geetha. I saw that in your presentation you had created these uh, bipartite networks of the dispersers as well as the fruits they're feeding on. I was just curious as to how you uh, sort of found interactions between them. Was it based on like fecal samples or like observation? This was a question I had.
Direct observation of removal of fruits from the observed plants.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I just have one more question for everyone, pretty much. Is one of the things that I'm sort of interested in is to see the potential susceptibility of monoculture restoration projects to invasion. And Dr. Shetty's presentation did allude to that. I mean, obviously, the forest there got invaded first by a tree, and then that was susceptible to a subsequent invasion. But I was just hoping to get your thoughts on maybe your experience with monocultures versus diverse tree restoration projects in the context of sort of invasion, broadly defined. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for your question. Long story short, monocultures will give away in a certain space and time very quickly because A, they lack genetic diversity, B, resilience, the whole biodiversity aspect is not there. So the day one goes out, they all go out. That is exactly what we are seeing with our Norway spruce, that just one bark beetle infestation and uh, like close to 50% of a country's forest is lost. So it's monocultures don't stay. Monocultures are like very big farms. So yeah, the second part is that to address it more from a generic ecological perspective, we've got a term known as nitrates. Now, please don't take the word nitrates as the NO3 molecule. No, it's a generic term known as more available proteins or more available nutrition in an ecosystem more than what is necessary. So see, a slightly nutrition deficient ecosystem is usually a good ecosystem. That is where most of your natives with a lot of diversity can survive. When it comes to monocultures, first, the monoculture itself changes the ecosystem, especially the soil parameters, in such a way uh, that nothing else can easily retake that space. And second is just to manage monocultures, whatever uh, levels of applications that we do to this landscape, that in itself kind of devoids it, like devoids all the other species to come in. So maybe does that answer your question? If have I answered all the parts that you were looking at?
Yes, I just wanted to. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I have more questions, but I will get in touch with you separately.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
I've shared my email address. Please do. Thanks.
Thank you.
Nikhil, could you please mute your because I think there's a lot of disturbance coming from that side. Okay. I think next I'll just take a question that's come up on the chat. It's by Harindra Kumar, and this question is directed to Megha. So he asks is, would it be appropriate to conduct study on trait differentiation among invasive species growing in different environments or between native and invasive species?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes, so as I mentioned in my presentation, it is very important to look at traits of invasive species with the background of native community, because traits in themselves will not provide useful information, but how different that trait is of the invader with the native community is what is going to be more informative. Another thing is that it is also very crucial to understand how different are the traits of natives themselves. You know, how one native is different in a particular trait with the other native. Only if an invader is more different than what the difference already exists in that native community, will you expect the invader to have a higher impact. So all sorts of these, just not looking at one trait or one species, but looking at holistically across multiple traits and multiple species is more important.
Arinder, does that answer your question? Do you have a follow-up on this? Or thank you, Megha, for sharing your points on this.
Thank you.
Next, I think we have Kuti from Tata Motors who's raised their hand. So I'd ask them to unmute and ask directly.
Kuti sir, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I think there's a follow-up on what Megha just said. This is from Tejaswini. She asks, will looking at the trait width of the native species in the landscape help us in understanding the impact of invasive species on them?
Yes, so the trait space of the native community will give you an understanding of how much niche is occupied. So there are a lot of studies which are coming up which are actually looking at community level trait occupancy of the native community and trying to understand if there are holes in these niches that can be filled by the invader, and or the invader comes and expands that niche. So you are right about that, that looking at the entire width of trait occupancy by the native is very important.
Arjunji, Kuti sir is not able to unmute. Can you please check?
He's managed to unmute himself.
I've been able to do this.
Thank you, Megha. Kuti, it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, panel. Very interesting. The question is not to any specific member of the panel, but I've got a larger question. So, we are from Tata Motors, and like us, many companies in and around the country and even globally are confronted with this idea of how do you, as a corporate, respond positively to the science related to biodiversity loss, and how could we really contribute as a practitioner to stemming this. Now, it could be if the answer that I'm looking for is not funding of research or doing a set of activities, but we got each corporate would have land masses both inside the factory and outside the factory. We have got people who are ready to volunteer. We are prepared to put our time and energy. And over the years, we would also see that many of our landscapes have trees. They have invasives. They are non-native species. Some of them may not be invasive at all. So do we have a toolkit that scientists like yourselves and specialists around on this call can advise the corporates and genuine people who want to make a difference, that kindly approach it, having studied and examined several aspects of the science around what we discussed today? What are those steps that companies should take and standard operating procedures which can be put into place where our suppliers, our channel partners, OEMs can really work together to make a difference? Because the test of the pudding is actually the eating. So, we've got a lot of trees which are invasives. But, we still see the birds there. We still see insects. We still see fruits. We get shade. It provides landscape level quality. So what is the problem from a corporate point of view? I do understand the science part of it. So how do you bridge this? And do you have an answer for that? If not immediately, can you help develop an answer to this? Because if you are able to develop this answer, then we are co-opting into this journey hundreds of thousands of well-meaning corporates, companies who want to participate in this journey to make a difference. Thank you.
Hi, Kuti. It's really nice to hear this, very caring question, I would say. And at this point, I think to discuss in detail anything, it's outside the purview of this meeting. But the ERA Alliance has a lot of experience in different landscapes, and I would heartily invite you to contact one of us, and the people who are most familiar with the specific area that any particular institution or organization wants to start this process of nurturing biodiversity and ecological process. I think we would be very glad to look at this together. So please get in touch.
Thank you. Thank you, Suprabha. We are already in touch with Rohan, who has actually been one of the panel colleagues on this call. We will get in touch with you. But the only reason I raised this or wanted to suggest is, beyond the science and the scientific experimentation that happens, are several people well-meaning who want to do but don't know what to do. So if we can develop this and put it in the public domain, it will help in great measure. So thank you for that, Suprabha. I'll talk to you and Rohan separately. Yeah, thank you.
Super, thanks.
Great.
Thanks, Kuti, and thanks, Suprabha, for that answer. I'll just take up. I'll just take up another few questions, and what I also want to, meanwhile, while you're online and thinking about, while you have all these questions, we want to do this as a series, right? So this is the first webinar or this first panel discussion of the series, and in the subsequent ones, we want to explore different topics related to invasive alien species. So I would request for those of you who are still online to just enter in the chat. What would be other aspects that you would like to explore when it comes to invasive alien species? And Kuti, to your question also, I think we are also trying to get in touch with other people who are working with invasives, and then we'll try and see if we can come up with something which is more robust, at least in some way, not robust, but more sensitive towards different invasive species. And we can try and see what that form really looks like eventually.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I'd ask Sanish's question here. It's addressed to Geetha or Supi, and there's another one to Megha. So I'll take the Geetha or Supi first, and then we'll go back to the other one. So Sanish's question is, could the recent rise in human-elephant conflicts in Wayanad be related to the spread of multiple invasive plant species, especially Senna spectaculus?
Actually, I'll request Supi to take this. I'm not familiar with either the landscape or studies of this kind.
So I think when the climate changes, behavior of species changes, and that's like an old law of life. It seems that when conditions give rise to certain plant communities, and then those plant communities give rise to other species will come in, and then the conditions change again. So native species, at least in our area, we have seen some that that spread, and even ground covering herbaceous endemics can spread in an area, and it's a really interesting thing to watch. And the question is, what did we do, or what happened that this Scapigerus acanthaceae species actually is now covering a whole hillside. And, and that question could be then problematic for the purists of the restorationists amongst us who say, oh, you shouldn't have a member from the Nilgiris in the Wayanad because that's not close enough to the reference landscape. But those are important questions, and I do think conditions when they change behavior of plants, whether they are introduced or native, will change, can change. The second is, I believe the wildlife human conflict detracts us from the bigger disturbances on the landscape. And the problem for me is not Senna. As I've said before in my talk, Senna is a response possibly to increased nitrification. It's a nitrogen fixer. Yes, it is, spreading through these areas. But, I would look at agriculture and roads and how large mammals have had to fight for territory in areas that grow sugarcane and, plants that are not necessarily healthy for anybody. So the urbanizing of a landscape is where I would place my battle and my challenge, and not another species.
Sanish, do you have a follow-up on this, or anything else you'd want to clarify here? I will take that as no for now. So thanks, Suprabha, for sharing and answering that question. I think next there was another question from Sanish to Megha, which is on not all alien introduced species are invasive. Just like some introduced species integrate well, do some native species also exhibit invasive characteristics within their own habitats?
That was to Megha.
Yes.
Sorry, I answered it. Megha, you better answer that one.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. So not all alien species are invasive. That's because what I mentioned as species which naturalize. So those can maintain and sustain their populations, but at lower abundances without basically coexisting with the native flora. So they are fauna and flora, and they're not going to really have an impact on the native biodiversity. So they won't be classified as invasive. For the second question, again, you're right. There are native species which exhibit invasive behaviors in the sense they will have higher local abundances and higher grain sizes, but those are not classified as alien invasive for obvious reasons that they are not alien to an area. But there are species which exhibit such behaviors, native species which exhibit such behaviors.
Thanks, Megha.
Thank you.
Sanish, is there anything else you would want to clarify at this point? Okay. So, I think we're at the end of the webinar. It's already 3:05, and I'm sure there will be some of you who, everyone will have other obligations already. So I think maybe what we can do is, if you've not already entered what you would like to discuss in the next panel discussion on invasive alien species, I think now will be a good time to do this. And I want to thank all of you. So I want to thank all of you who've been, who joined and started and, went through all the technical difficulties of the starting. But after that, I think we were really, we kind of managed from then on. So thank you so much for staying around and being a part of this conversation and this discussion. And I really would like to thank all the speakers, Suprabha, Megha, Geetha, and Rohan. It's been such a nice pleasure to try and get everyone together and hear everyone's inputs and, just kind of see the spectrum at which we are all looking at the same topic. And that has been, for me, that has been a really eye-opening experience, or I don't know, I have no other way to put it. It's just been, how deep can we go and how wide should we go? And those are questions that we should explore. So thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your views with us. And thank you everyone else for joining in, asking your questions, and continuing to stick around and maybe join us for the next session as well.
Thanks, Arjun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all.